This is Gemara in Kesubos Daf Samoch Ches. So the learning for this month has been generously sponsored as an incredible schos neshama for Esther Reyzel Basar and Mair Mirtashem. The learning of the entire Chabura as we inch closer to the completion of the 6th parak. As we've been learning, the incredible Yesaides of Tzedakah the past few days should bring Esther Reyzel Basar and Mair to a higher place in Gan Eden Neshel Ma'ila. We pick it up in the bottom of Samach Zayin Amid Beis. We are 3 lines from the bottom in which the Gemara begins with Rav Abba. Another incredible detail about tzedakah. Rav Abba v'tzayer zuzi b'sudare. Rav Abba would tie up money in literally his scarf, and he would throw this scarf behind his back, and then he would make himself found, he'd make himself available to the poor people. And then he would literally slant his eyes. He would glance backwards to make sure, he would glance backwards to make sure that no Ramayim, that no swindlers would come and take the money. And obviously the question being, the whole purpose that he put it behind his back is so that the Aniyim don't know who he is. But then if he goes and looks, how does it help? So the Mefarshim here explain that he somehow managed to make sure that the swindlers didn't take the money without really seeing the aniyim. Continuing the Gemara of Chanina ve'ahu ani or Chanina had a certain ani that he would send him 400 zuz every Erev Shabbos Yom Echad. One day Shadinu na'alei biyad devisu. One day Rav Chanina sent the money with his wife. His wife comes back and says, guess what? They don't need the cash. So says Rav Chanina, really? Why not? My chazis, what did you see that you're saying they don't need the cash? So she says, I heard that they were asking him, with what would you like to eat your food? As we turn over to Samachesam and Aleph, what are the options? Bitli kesev or bitli zav, on silver tablecloths or golden tablecloths. So his wife says to Rav Chanina, clearly they don't need the cash if they're going and they're dining on silver and golden tablecloths. Amar says Rav Chanina, Hainu dam Rav Elazar, Povin and Chazik Toivel Ramayim. Come and let us show a taiva to the Ramayim who pretend that they need money but they do not. For if not for them, we would do Aveiros every day when we ignore the poor. But now, the Pashim Shad over here is, but now that there are Ramayim, we have an excuse. We could always say that it's difficult to tell who's a Ramay and who is not. Shnemar, as the Pasuk says, V'kara lecha al Hashem, v'haya becha chait. And it will come against you to Hashem, it will be a sin upon you. V'tana, Rav Chia bar Rav Medifti, Rav Yishua ben Karcha, Omer, Kol hamalimina min atzdaka. Anyone who averts his eyes from giving tzedakah, ki'ilu, oived avodas kachavim, as if he worshipped idols, terrible. It says over here, watch yourself, perhaps there'll be a thought in your heart. And it says elsewhere, that the irresponsible men went out. Mala'alon over there is referring to as chamav kan, avodas kachavim. So yesterday we learned of the incredible Maila. And today we learn of the terrible punishment for those who try to avert their eyes, those who try not to give tzedakah. But at the same time, we are seeing that there is a concept of a ramai. There is a concept they have to be careful to give to someone who's legit. And from here is where it comes from, that if you're not sure, nowadays, of course, we have special takanas, we have different systems to ensure that those that are collecting actually need the tzedakah. And indeed, la'alacha, when it's only obligated to give someone who has the proper verification and documentation. Continues the Gemara about 10 lines down. The first line is Tanu Rabban. Someone who blinds his eye, bloats his stomach, he shrivels his leg, basically does all these things to look like he's a nebuch, to look like he needs money. He's not going to leave the world until he actually needs that, until he comes to all the terrible things that he's pretending. If he takes tzedakah, he doesn't need it. So one, God forbid, should never take if he doesn't need, because then could cause him to actually become one that needs. Continuing the Gemara, we learned over there, we do not obligate someone to sell his house and to sell his utensils in order to not take tzedakah. There's a basic minimum. Says the Mishnah in Peah that one takes tzedakah at, the minimum being 200 zuz. But says the Gemara over there, says the Mishnah, but that minimum does not require you to sell the basics, to sell your house or sell your utensils. Ask the Gemara, really? V'loi v'atani v'learn to the Brayisa. Hayim mishtamish v'kli zav, mishtamish v'kli kesef, v'kli kesef, mishtamish v'kli nechayshis. Says the Brayisa that if one is using golden utensils and he doesn't have money, sell them and buy silver. If you're using silver, you don't have money, sell them and buy copper. So what do we see? We see clearly that you are, yes, obligated to sell your utensils. Amar Rav Zved loy kasha, habemita v'shalchan habekoisais v'kairais. Two different entities, explains Rav Zved. The price that says you have to sell your items in exchange for something of cheaper value, that's a bed and a table. But your cups and your plates, since one is generally particular about what cup and plate he eats out of, that the Chachamim did not require you to sell. Ask the Gemara, Maisha Kaisis Karis Deloi. Explains the Gemara, as we just said, the Amar, because he's going to say, Easily meat, isi me. It's detestable, it's disgusting to me to eat out of such a cheap and lowly item, to put into terms that perhaps we could understand if a wealthy person who always eats in China, tell him, oh, go and buy plastic. He can't fathom eating on plastic. Perhaps not very cheap plastic. So he says, it's must to me. Ask the Gemara, what do you mean, his bed and table also. You can also say, I can't eat on the cheaper one. So Amar Rava, Braid the Rabba, you're right, a noob shot. You know what the price is referring to? The price that says that you have to sell them, it's not referring to a table or chair, it's not referring to your cups, but rather a machrisha de kaspa, a silver plow, a work gardening utensil. A gardening utensil one does not have this personal attachment to, and now we're going to make him sell if he doesn't have the cash. Says Rababa that when it says you don't have to sell your items, that's one who's not holding at the point of givoy, which is when Bezdin comes down to collect your items. But when it says you do have to sell your items, that is when one is already Rahman al-Islan at the point that Bezdin is taking away his items. And now we're at the Mishnah in the middle of Samachas of Aleph, in which we go back to the topic that we were discussing. Says the Mishnah, if I have a Saima, if there's an orphan, this Yisaima is married off by his brother, or his mother, Yisaima, that is a Kitana Midaita, and it is a consensual marriage. Even though she's a Kitana, she accepts to get married based on that which the mother and brother says. And they write to her a dowry, the mother, the brother, in order to make her be able to get married, write a small nedunya, a small dowry of 150 zuz. She is able to, mishetagdil, when she grows up, she's able to get this money from her mother and her brother, that which is fitting of given to her. As we'll see in the Gemara, even though they only stipulated a meager and small amount, and even though she seemingly agreed to that amount, when she grows up, she's able to demand whatever is befitting her, meaning whatever the estate of her dead father could afford. As we'll see, it means 1/10 of all the possessions. That's the Tanakama. Continues the Gemara, how much? Rav Yudah Eimer Mesi is Abasari Shaina, Yunatzali Shania. If the father was alive and he married off the first daughter and he wrote in a dunya, then the second daughter should be given the same amount that the father originally gave to the first one. Says the Chacham, what do you mean? Just because the first marriage they gave such, that means they're going to give the same? Maybe he's poor to rich or rich to poor. Rather, we evaluate the properties that are to the father, and that's which we give the Nadunya based on. So says the Gemara, let's understand this thing. Amar Shmuel, leparnasa shamin ba'af. Says Shmuel, when we're trying to figure out leparnasa, how much a Yosef is going to get from the estate of the father for this dowry, says Shmuel, we determine what the father would have given had he been alive. Meisvei asked the Gemara, Says the Raysa, the daughters are given food and provided from the estate of their father. Ketzad. Says the Bryce explicitly, we do not say, had the father been alive, this is how much he would have given, which of course is the kasha. Rather evaluate the state and give her accordingly. So my lab or Zabal asked the Gemara is now referring to giving that which the husband is befitting, giving the dowry, giving the nedunya. And yet we see we do not assess, we do not do like Shmuel said, Shamin Ba'av. Rather we assess what the estate is worthy to give. Amar Rav Nachor Yitzchak, 3 lines to the medium-sized line, Lahoi, Beparnosas Atzmai. The Bryce is referring to the money that she gets for herself. Ask the Gemara. It says provided and sustained, 2 different entities. It sounds like they're 2 different things. One is the money that goes to the husband, the nedunya, the dowry, and the other is the food money that goes for herself to survive. Answers the Gemara, in the first medium-sized line, they're both referring to the money she gets herself. But really, it's still not a problem, because that which it says she sustained, referring to the food and the drink, that which she provided for is referring to the clothing, the lavosh, the kisuye, and the covering. So that's the way to answer up this kasha. So says the Gemara, let's ask further on Shmuel. Again, Shmuel is the one that started off the Gemara that taught us that Liparnasa, that when it comes to give the provisions for the dowry, we assess that which we think the father would have given. Not necessarily that which the father, not necessarily that which the estate is able to be given, but rather that which we believe the father himself would give. Tanan, ask the Gemara in the second line, we learned in the Mishnah. He said our Mishnah, the Chachamim argue and see sometimes a person's monetary stature could change. Elo, what did the Chachamim say? We evaluate the Nechasim. It doesn't say we evaluate the father. My Ani and my Asher. What did the bright Mishnah mean when it said poor and rich? It just doesn't have the cash, the karka. It's going to be an extreme machlekes that the Tanakama is going to hold, even though he doesn't have anything. You have to give like you gave the other daughter, like you gave originally. How could that be? The estate doesn't have the money to give for that. Elolav, says the Gemara in the first white line, Ani bedas, Ashir bedas. It's referring to in character. It's referring to, like Shmuel said, seemingly, that we evaluate that which he would have given. But what's the kasha? Vikatani, but it still says, even though we're referring to a potential case that we could evaluate the father's das, still, what do we see? We evaluate and we assess the nechasim and we give it. Says the Gemara clearly, we're not going with the umdina and it's a kasha on Shmuel. On the second white line, answers the Gemara, Shmuel holds with Rav Yehuda. It's not Rav Yehuda. Aimer meisi bas rishani nasin l'shniya kederech shenasin l'rishayna. So Shmuel holds that we're going to be giving like the second daughter, similar to we given to the first daughter, we're aimed bedas of the father. So says the Gemara, the classical kasha name Allah Rav Yehuda. Why didn't Shmuel just say we pass like Rav Yehuda? Answers the Gemara, only within the Nisuin that they revealed in their das, that's they want Kamash Malan. So Shmuel teaches us, Shmuel, by giving us the reasoning, explains to us that the whole Rav Yehuda comes from the fact that we go Basar Umdana, whether or not there was Nisuin at all. So we see clearly that Rav Yehuda's case is not only when the father marries off his daughter, and therefore we have something to compare and contrast that which the father wanted to give. So says the Gemara, so why Lamaisa does the Mishnah say a case of Isiyah? That even though he was Isiyah, even though they did a full Nisuin, Still, lo yazlinan basar umdina. Says the Gemara, Amar le Rav Chisda. Says Rav to Rav Chisda, Darshinan mishma chalocha ki Rav Yehuda. Says Rav to Rav Chisda, should we paskin lemaisa like Rav Yehuda? Amar le ye Rav kol gayani mili mal yisa tidrishu mishmai. Says Rav Chisda, all your wonderful things, all your excellent dinim and teachings and shiurim should say over in my name. So says the Gemara, 1 second. Rava seemingly is agreeing with Rav Yehuda based on that which we just said. But I asked the Gemara, really, Yomiyama Rava Achi, does Rava really concur with that which Rav Yehuda said? V'atanya, we learned in a Bryce. Rabbi Omer Basin says, Achim, says Rabbi, the daughter is supported from the brothers. What does he do? No, he tells Iser Nechasim. How are you supported by giving me 1/10 of the entire estate? Ask the Gemara. So what do we see? We see that it goes by the estate, not by the das of the father. Ramarav looks like a Rebbe. Explains the Gemara like Damina Hada Midnei Hadelai Amidnei. One is where we assess the father. One is where we do not assess the father. But let's proceed further before we explain. So it's a steer in Rebbe. The difference is going to be when we actually were able to, the father is around, and we could be oimid in his das, or when the father is not here. Therefore, unfortunately, we don't have the ability to be oimid b'das of the father. Continues the Gemara Gufa. 3 lines at the end of the Gemara. Says the Gemara, let's delve a bit deeper to that which Rebbe said. Omar Rebbe Basan Izaynis Menach. Says Rebbe, a daughter is supported by the brothers, by the estate that the brothers inherited of their father. What the halacha says, the Rייzel and tells us in the Chasim, gives 1/10 of the estate. Amrul the Rabbi, Lidvarecha, based on what you're saying, if the daughters each get 1/10, so if there are 10 daughters, the daughters are going to take the whole estate. So you're telling me if there's one son over there, the son is not going to get anything? So Amr Lehen, Rabbi responds, no, in the last line, this is what I mean. Rishai, tells you the Chas. Shmiya b'masha shiara, shlish is masha shiara v'chayzach l'shaveh. The first one takes 10%. The second one takes 10% of that which is left, 9.1%. The next one takes 10% of that which is left, so it goes from 100 to 90. Then it goes to 81. 10% of 90 is 9, and then it goes 10% of 81, which is 8.1 to 72.5, 71.5, etc. And then the chayzer is v'cholkes b'shaveh. And after everything is divided, which if you do the math, 10, 9, 8.1, 6.6, 7.9, 7.3, comes out to about 65% of the entire estate. Then, you take all of that, and that is what you split up equally amongst the 10 daughters. So ask the Gemara on the top of Samachas, Amid Beis, Kol Chada V'Chada B'Nafshei Shagla. I don't understand. How are they splitting it equally? That we ended off by saying that Chayzis v'cholkes b'shava. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? Each one already took that which they have, so what are you splitting equally? So explains the Gemara, Hachi Kamarim, Ba'u kulam lihinase ke'achas. If all of them are coming to get married at the same time, then cholkes b'shava, then they pool everything and they resplit it up. And it comments the Gemara, Masayel Ramnasta Damar Ramasta Bali Nasa Kulum Ka'achas Nalo is Isser Echad. Isser Echad Salgadai means they all take a 1/10 in total. Elanolo is Isser Ke'echad. They take 1/10 together, each take 1/10, and then they split it up amongst all of them. Continues the Gemara discussing how does this person take the estate of the dead father. So Tanu Rabbanan has been bigru Nisu ben Nisu Bagru. If daughters, whether they became Bageres, 12 years old, before or after they got married, they lose their support once they are married. They do not have to be supported from the father's estate, as we actually saw back in Gimel and Beis, whether one reaches by Geres, whether one gets married, in both scenarios, they don't get support from the father's estate. Continues the Brayta, but they don't lose their Parnasa, they don't lose their dowry. They even lose that. So what do they do? They should literally hire for themselves husbands. What does that mean? It makes themselves very desirable to get married when they tell their prospective husband that you're going to get my nedunya that's in my dead father's estate. And then the husband extracts the nedunya from the yarshim from the estate. And comments the Gemara, looks like your Rebbe, that is indeed the halacha. Esvei asked the Gemara, Rav Nachman, that says our Mishnah, if his was married off by the brother or the mother, because when she grows up, what can she do? Like that which is really befitting. If they wrote 100 or 50, she can take whatever really she's deserving. So says the Gemara, the implication of the Mishnah is Taima de Ketana, Hagedayla Vitra. But if she were to be a Gedayla, if she gets married once she is already a Gedayla, once she's out of Katanos, she then does not get her dowry. So seemingly our Mishnah is going with the opinion of Rav Shimon Elazar. Answers the Gemara, no, the Mishnah is not a steer to Rabbi, but rather Rabbi is referring to where she makes a macha, where she says, I'm not happy about this. Whereas our Mishnah is referring to where she did not make a macha, and that's when she's going to keep that which the mother or brother stipulated. Says the Gemara, this is logical. The Rabbi. The tiny Rabbi Yomi Batz and his Menachem knows this in the Chasim. Nizayin is in Shin is on his law. It's only if she supported Allah. Shema Mina. The first Brayta that the Baigeris does yes get the Nedunyas where she protested. Whereas when she did not protest, then she does not. She forfeits it. Shema Mina. So Amar Lei Ravina LeRav, about 20 lines down. The first line is Lei. Says Ravina to Rava Amrlan Ravada Barava Mishmeich. Ravad Barava said in your name, Bagra ino tzricha limchais. A Baigeres does not have to be moicha. Even if she does not moicha, when she reaches the age of Baigeres, she still gets the estate, she still gets 1/10 of the estate. Similarly, if she does Nisuin, so this of course is where we started off. That Nisuin and Baigeres takes her out of the Rishas of the father, takes her out and doesn't get the estate of the father. But says the Gemara, if she grew up, if she gets married, she does not need to protest, and she's still going to retain the 10% of the estate. As the Gemara, whereas if she became a Baigeres and she got married, both of them together, then she does indeed waive everything unless she protests. Ask the Gemara, he answered that Rebbe is referring to where she protested. The Mishnah is referring to where she did not protest. So what do we see? Do we see that the Naira must indeed make a macha in order to keep that which she wants? And if Rav is not arguing, clearly he's accepting this differentiation between the cases. So how can you tell me that Rav does not require the Naira to make the macha? Answers the Gemara, loikasha to kamizani minayu lo kamizani menayu. When does Rav say that she does not have to protest where she is being supported? Hadaloi mizani minayu. But where does she have to be making the macha where she is not supported? So continues the Gemara, and with this we conclude. Amar Ravuna, Amar Rebbe Parnasa, Inoi Kitanai Ksuba. Parnasa, the fact that Yisema gets supported, gets a dowry, is not the same as that which she collects in the Ksuba, not the same the money that she's given to buy food to survive. My Inoi Kitanai Ksuba, says the Gemara, what does that mean? If you're going to tell me that the difference being whether you collect from Mishubadim properties that were sold in Intra, what's the Chedish? That's clear. That's clear that we're Maitzia and we take away from the sold properties for the Parnas and not from Zainis. This difference being whether you collect from Metaltalin or not. So says the Gemara, it says the Gemara, no, because Rebbe himself holds both the Nedunya and the Parnasa. She does yet be able to collect from it. Rebbe says everything you could actually collect. Elamai Barnasa, Kitanai Kesubos says, well, what does it mean? He learns in a Rייזel, we don't listen to him if he doesn't want to support his family. Why? Parnasa Einai Kitanai Kesubos, because Parnasa, the Nedunya, is not the same thing as the Tanai Kesubos. That's what we're going to differentiate the cases. And we'll pick up further within the Shita of Rabbi in the next year, the Siyata of Ishmael.